Genesis chapter 30 is categorized by sibling conflicts between Jacob's wives, the birth of many more children under the blessing of God, and Jacob eventually achieving great wealth after striking a deal with his father-in-law, aka Sazala, or what? Omkwe. Yes. So chapter 29, if you haven't watched episode 29, please pick it up on our YouTube channel by simply searching for for a handle which is Abdi Ministries. So chapter 29 described the treacherous circumstances of Jacob's marriage to a pair of sisters, that is Leah and Rachel. Expecting to marry Rachel after 7 years of hard labor, Jacob was stunned to find that his father-in-law, Laban, switched sisters during the wedding night. The end result of this ploy was Jacob being married to two women, and with another 7 years of hard work again. In response to Jacob's understandable resentment of Leah, well, God allowed her to conceive sons, while Rachel remained, unfortunately, barren. This chapter begins with a despondent Rachel declaring to Jacob, "Give me a child, or I shall die." Not only is she desperate to become a mother, she envies her sister Leah, who has already borne 4 beautiful sons to Jacob. Jacob loved Rachel more than, of course, he loved Leah. But he rightly corrects her that God, and only God alone, is the giver of children. And we'll see that in verses 1 to 2. This eventually will become a theme of the chapter. One explored both in human and animal examples. In response to her infertility, Rachel follows the unfortunate example of Jacob's grandmother, Sarai. We studied that in Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 to 4. She gives her own servant to Jacob as a wife, that is Bilhah. By customs of that time, any children born to the servant would be considered those of the wife or of the mistress. Now, Bilhah, that was the servant of Rachel, soon bears Jacob 2 beautiful young boys, Rachel's sons by proxy. That sounds familiar, right? Proxy servers, yeah. Proxies, sort of a path through which. Anyhow, Rachel named the boys by, for her own circumstances and feelings that the time they were born in verses 3 to 8. At the time, Leah, that is the elder sister to Rachel, she had stopped becoming pregnant, perhaps because Rachel's influence sort of kept Jacob from, sleeping any further with her. But also there's a possibility she just became infertile, or for she had that, temporal infertility. Anyhow, she followed what Rachel did. She also got her maid and gave her to Jacob. Hers was called Zilpah. And in turn, she also gave birth to 2 young boys, which totaled 6 kids for Leah, and now, in quotes, 2 kids for Rachel. Yeah, what a competition and a crazy one. So these belong to Leah by proxy as well, and she gives them happy names, as we're going to study in verses 9 to 13. None of these births, though they ended in rivalry between Rachel and Leah, both know that Rachel remains barren and that Leah remains unloved by Jacob. Their conflicts flares to the surface when Leah's son, that is Verbo, brings some rare mandrake plants he found in the bush. Mandrakes were thought to help with arousal, sexual arousal, and infertility. When Rachel asked Leah for the plants, likely hoping they will help her to get pregnant, which actually they did, but we'll get more details of that in a bit, Leah lashed out at Rachel how she had taken her husband and now she also wants to take her mandrakes. Boy, Rachel, apparently desperate, offers to give Leah one night sleeping with Jacob in exchange for the plants. Man, this family was crazy. The mess that was in this home, it was crazy. You know? Hey, give me your plants and I'll give you my husband to sleep with her for one night. Hey, she also is my husband. But anyhow, this clearly shows that Rachel apparently she held great power over Jacob in family dynamics. I mean, she had such power to command Jacob to go and sleep with Leah. And she also had the same amount of power to stop Jacob from going to sleep with Leah. Crazy, isn't it? Anyhow, Leah, she had a beautiful one night stand with, not one night stand, sorry about that. But yes, she had a night sleep with Jacob, her husband as well, and she began to bear children again, having two more boys and one beautiful girl called Dinah, naming them all God's provision in her life. Rachel too, finally, bore herself, she bore her first son, who was then called my namesake, Joseph. I love Joseph. Oh, a beautiful character. We will see beautiful Joseph in in Egypt, as he became the prime minister and one of the biggest and most powerful men in the world. But we'll study about that in Exodus. So her name for him, that is Joseph, amounts to a prayer for another son to follow in verses 17 and actually verses 17 to 24. The narrative then shifts to inform us that Jacob's 14 years of service to Laban in exchange for his two wives had sort of come to an end. Yeah? It had come to an end. So he demanded that his father-in-law, aka Moko, Cesara, send him away so he can return home with his own people, his own wealth, his own animals, everything with his. It's possible that Laban retained some legal right to not release Jacob. Somehow he felt he had the rights over Jacob, and that he could decide when to release him. Well, he considered Jacob more of a servant, but not a slave. He wasn't a slave. Those kind of rights should have them of a slave, not as a normal servant. A servant could leave as and when they felt they needed to go. But one thing for sure is that they will not go with what didn't belong to them. Yeah? It's only slaves that whatever they bought, whatever they owned, whatever children they produced during that stay with you, they were for the master. But in any case, Laban said plainly that he had been blessed because Jacob had been blessed greatly by the Lord. So he asked Jacob what would be his new wage in case he decided to work for him. In other words, he's kind of asking Jacob, hey, could you please continue working for me? And if you do so, if you agree, also name the price to which you'd like to be paid for that service. Now, you would expect Jacob to ask for some sort of a flat wage or some sort of a percentage of Laban's flock, but hey, he did not. Instead, he he asked to keep any newly born goats or lambs that are sort of color, not of standard color. So most of the sheep in Laban's flock were either white, mostly were actually white, and most of the goats were black, like whole white, whole black. A very small percentage of the goats were speckled or striped or spotted, and some sheep were actually black, but mostly were white. So after agreeing to Jacob's deal, Laban immediately removed all of the off-color animals from the flock, and he took them 3 days' journey away from the main group. I mean, he made it impossible for these animals to ever intermingle with each other to create the strain to continue into that reproduction. Now, it'll look like Jacob's deal will go burst in verses 29 to 36. But hey, stick with me as we go into the details. Instead, the Lord supernaturally, as he always does, blessed Jacob's unconventional efforts to cause white sheep to produce black lambs. Of course, He's Jacob, the ill catcher. He's a muia. He's always trying out and getting the black goats to produce mixed of colors, sort of offsprings. Well, we aren't told yet. Jacob had apparently been informed in another dream that God intended to correct Laban's cheating, as we're going to see that in Genesis 31, 7 to 12. Yes, that is our next episode, so please don't miss it out. So while in this chapter only mentions Jacob's use of strapped poles, there's really no confusion that God, not the poles, caused the change in animals' color. It weren't those poles that he laid upon the poles as they were drinking the water, and then they started mating that caused the genetic, mutations and DNA, whatever, to create the colors. No, it wasn't that. It was actually God. But, he let Jacob think that it was that. Normally, God does that. It reminds me of this beautiful example, this beautiful story in the Bible. There were so many people who were squeezing Jesus. So many. You had about 100 or so people was, squeezing Jesus as he was walking through the masses of people. But there was this particular woman amongst those. When she touched the cloth of Jesus Christ, boom, she got healed. How come the others didn't get healed? Now, you wouldn't say the magic was on the cloth because there were others who were actually touching him. The difference, you wouldn't, attribute that. But Jesus, of course, when he heard that, he said, hey, my power has left me. And of course, when he looked at it, your faith has healed you. Amen? So it's not the cloth, much as Jesus' cloth could actually have power, but also it was the faith of the other person that healed them. Anyhow, in addition, Jacob bred the flock to produce strong, off-color animals for him and weak, solid, colored animals for Laban in verses 37 to 42. Those are not my words. Colored animals were stronger than solid colors. Jacob grew enormously wealthy. With the Lord's blessings, he overcame Laban's scheme to keep him poor and dependent on his father-in-law or on his Zala. We'll study that in verses 43. There is the summary of Genesis chapter 30. Please pick up the full episode on our website. That is www.abdministries.org. You can also scan the QR code if you're watching it on TV. It will take you straight to our YouTube channel or actually our website. Or you could actually go to YouTube or even Spotify. You could actually scan for our candle. You could search for a hand of the ministries on YouTube channel or Spotify plus Facebook. And you'll be able to watch the entire episode about today's message.